for all the details.
With 100% confidence.
And Dr. Bauer, I believe that's even a closer up of that gunshot wound. State Exhibit 96. Tell us if you can, you got the green marker. Go ahead and tell us.
This is the fat, adipose fat tissue under the skin.
All right, we're dipping in live here to the George Zimmerman trial. We believe that's the medical examiner on the stand right now giving his testimony. The defense is expected to wrap up today. Now, the mother and brother of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin took the stand this morning at this trial of the neighborhood volunteer watch guy that has been charged with murder. Joining me this morning is attorney and legal analyst Sezen Oygar, right? I got it correct. You're Turkish, which surprised me. So,
right.
But anyway.
Throwing you off a little bit after this July 5th.
Exactly. So let's go to that. We listened to the mother this morning in court. We took it live, and she basically is responding to whose voice is on that 911 call, and then we'll talk about it. Let's go to the tape.
Ma'am, that screaming or yelling, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And who do you recognize that to be, ma'am?
Trayvon Benjamin Martin.
Okay, not a big surprise that mom would say that that was her son. What significance is that for a jury at this point?
When you look at the jury, we've got 6 women, 5 of them are mothers. This was kind of one of the most highly anticipated moments in the trial. We were waiting for her to get up here, and being able to identify that that was her son's voice, and really that's huge for the prosecution, because what their hope is that's going to pull on the heartstrings of these 5 mothers in particular. So it wasn't as dramatic as I think most of us were gonna, think it was gonna come across, but that's still very good for the prosecution, and probably, one of the only little golden nuggets that they seem to have. I keep waiting for the prosecution to put on their case, and they really haven't. This past week was a little bit better than the week before for the prosecution. They got out some testimony from Officer Sybrina, which really, his testimony went directly to the depraved mind element. But last week, the defense kind of kept hitting it. And if, I think maybe some viewers, it kind of went past them, but if you were a lawyer, it was one of those moments where you could jump out of your seat almost when you heard Officer Smith and then Officer Singleton say there was no evidence that George Zimmerman had of ill will, hatred, or spite. So those are those key words. And you're just waiting for the prosecution to hit on that to try to negate it. Because if the prosecution can't establish that there was evidence of this killing happening with depraved mind, that's going to totally go for, an acquittal. And finally, this week, we got some of that testimony from Sybrina saying, yes, George Zimmerman, it was consistent with profiling, and yes, there was this ill will, hatred, or spite. Okay,
but even in this case that we just saw, and then the brother taking the stand, and it's also saying, yes, it was my brother I heard on the tape. The defense comes back and says, well, wait a minute, to the brother, you testify, or you didn't testify, you told a reporter earlier that you couldn't tell who it was. So now all of a sudden you're so sure that it is. So again, the defense planting the doubt.
The seed of doubt, and jurors are typically going to remember the last thing that they heard. So by diminishing the brother's credibility and saying he couldn't really determine if this was, Trayvon's voice or not, it's still it's the defense's game at this point.
At this point, with the prosecution resting his case, the defense taking on beginning next week, probably you're not giving high marks to the prosecution so far.
I'm not. You had such high hopes kind of for the prosecution when they first came out here. You've got a 17-year-old who, whether or not he had a history of violence or not, it's a 17-year-old whose life was taken away prematurely, and the prosecution came out with such an amazing opening argument, but you're on the edge of your seat wanting to see them put on their case, and it hasn't happened for me yet. The big elephant in the room is, okay, how did George Zimmerman get these injuries? And they still haven't done anything to show that he didn't have a reasonable fear of imminent, bodily harm. And, so maybe he exaggerated his injuries or not. He still had a broken nose and a bloody head.
What's the key next week when the defense takes over? And do you think